There seems to be a growing movement, and this seems to be particularly amongst men, but maybe that's just where I'm noticing it, of people saying happiness doesn't matter. And perhaps there is some sort of misunderstanding with what happiness is. And I admit fully that I am one of these proponents of saying happiness doesn't matter. I would rather be effective. I would rather be successful. I would rather make a difference than be happy. This is to conclude that those things are mutually exclusive. I do not know that they are, but I do think that there's a large part of my being that thinks if I am happy, quote unquote happy, whatever it is that means, that I will not work as hard as I can, or perhaps even just as hard as I do. And I think that that is part of the pervasive paranoia that comes over people who say that they don't want to be happy. They don't care if they are happy. One person who did think about happiness in a positive light was the poet Robert Louis Stevenson. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where literature lives. We are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in the poetry discussion playlist, now over 850 videos strong. The poem in question today is a brief one, a couplet at that. One might hesitate to call it a poem, but that's how it's presented, so that's what we will do. Happy Thought by Robert Louis Stevenson, and it reads as such. The world is so full of a number of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. Now, this feels almost trite. This feels as if Mark Twain and Ezra Pound had a baby, doesn't it? It feels like the writings of Mark Twain found their outlet through the pen of Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound, famously, maybe his most famous poem, probably his second most famous poem, next to A River Merchant's Wife, which has appeared on the channel, by the by. In a Station of the Metro by Ezra Pound. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bow. That is Ezra Pound's philosophy, or at least his artistry, in a couplet that is meant to be an entire poem, and maybe not as much wisdom as there is in the Robert Louis Stevenson couplet here. But still, I think that most people, if asked, would say that the Ezra Pound poem, couplet poem, feels more like poetry than does the Robert Louis Stevenson poem. But that is not to say that there is not artistry in the couplet given to us by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I think more than artistry, there is a great deal of wisdom. There is a great deal of the philosophy of Robert Louis Stevenson. So let's talk about the imposition here. Let's ask the question, what right do we have to be ungrateful? There is so much in the world. Now, the cynics would argue that there is so much bad in the world as well. That's true. There's a lot of bad in the world. There's a lot of people doing nasty things. There's a lot of people doing things to other people. Still, we do have so much. There is so much for which we might say thanks. And this seems to be a part of the deeper ethos of Robert Louis Stevenson as a man. We have some quotes here from Robert Louis Stevenson that are very much in line with the subject of the poem and the conclusion of the poem. A Robert Louis Stevenson quote that gets a lot of play. There is no duty we so much underrate as the duty of being happy. By being happy, we sow anonymous benefits upon the world. I feel that that's true, right? I think that if you are a happy type person and you end up making a difference in the day of someone else, that is a positive, that is a good thing. I think that so from the, I guess, cynical point of view, there is more direct good to be done through hard work than there is through the byproduct of someone usurping some bit of your happiness or simply adopting some bit of your happiness through the osmosis of being exposed to other happiness. But I do think that there is something profound to people who need to be happy, seeing other people being happy, being exposed to that sort of happiness. And if we're talking about the core conceit of the poem, I think it does go back to that original question: what right do we have to be ungrateful? And this is another quote from Robert Louis Stevenson: "Keep your eyes open to your mercies. The man who forgets to be thankful has fallen asleep in life." This, I think, attacks the undercurrent of that unwillingness to admit you want to be happy more deeply than either the poem or the first quote there. To say that you are asleep if you are not happy, I think I think is accurate. But I think for someone like myself who does bury himself in work very often at the expense of happiness, is that, yeah, the idea of happiness seems superfluous. But it also means if we're not happy, if we're not to be unhappy, but just not to be happy, is to be asleep. What emotion can we feel that will more fully awaken us than the emotion of happiness? What is it that there is for us if it is not happiness? For us, right? I think that a lot of people who wish to work, who wish to dispel the rumor of happiness, that is that is a byproduct of wanting to do service for others. It is not an indulgent philosophy. It seems to be one, I think, to people who don't ascribe to it. It seems on some level sort of selfish that you would not care about happiness, yours or the happiness of others. But I think that underneath that movement is the realization that happiness is not safety. Happiness is not thriving. Happiness is not nourishment. But I think that that is to accept that happiness is not nourishment is maybe to undermine the nourishment of mindset, the nourishment of feeling that things are okay. And I think a lot of the people who do not wish to be happy have maybe never truly felt it, have maybe never truly been there, have perhaps never actually experienced that thing which they are so ready to forsake. And if we're talking about that, the idea that happiness is superfluous, I think maybe we can go to the root of what this thought comes from, perhaps perversedly so, and that is Stoicism. I think that the Stoics, in their maybe cold approach to philosophy and life, thereby, I think that it is with a Stoic I think that it is with stoic armor that some people go about life not worried about whether or not they are happy. And that is not actually Stoicism. Stoics do not believe that there are no emotions. Stoics believe that the emotions cannot override the things that you have to do anyway. So let's go to a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." Is there a better definition of happiness than that? When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is. When you arise in the morning, be thankful for the breath that you take. Be thankful for the thoughts that you get to enjoy. Be thankful for the food and drink that you get to enjoy. Be thankful for those that you love. I think that in Stoicism, gratitude is the ultimate humility. To be gracious is to be humble. To be grateful, pardon me, is to be humble. And that leads us to another pair of questions towards humility. How much of this life do you deserve? How much of this life did you earn? How much of this life are you living because of the things that you did? Every day we get up, we go out, we drive on the roads. We didn't build those roads. We use the internet. We didn't create the internet. We put clothes on our back. We didn't make the clothes. We eat food. We did not, maybe we made the food. Certainly we did not source the food unless you are part of a very select group of people, right? There's happiness to be found in that, and happiness does not mean being overcome with joy. Happiness does not mean ultimately succumbing to the fruits of life. Happiness does not mean quitting. Happiness does not mean being lazy. Happiness does not mean any number of things that I think a lot of us sort of blindly accept happiness as meaning when we are shelling up and using excuses to lead the life that we're leading. To live in a coil of labor. That is not happiness. But happiness does not stop that. I personally am very guilty of simply not recognizing the privilege of life. Simply not waking up and saying, I get to live another day. I get to be here again. I get to do these things that I want to do. There was an occurrence in my life recently where someone died really suddenly, and it makes you take stock. It makes you take inventory of those things in your life and those things you have not done but you had wished to. And I think it's a very selfish thought, but I think it's very human, and I think it's probably very healthy to take that moment and say that, that could have been me. If your life had a period or an exclamation mark or a question mark put into the middle of it right now, boom, you're gone. What was the life that you had led? If you had been a miserable wretch all the while that you were contributing, how fast would people forget you? I can't remember who it came from. I was not expecting to talk about this quote. It's very common, but I can't remember who said it. People do not remember who you were or what you did. They remember how you made them feel. I don't know who said that. I apologize, but it's a very common quote. You could find it if you were so interested as to do so. And I think that's true. How often do you ask that question if you disappeared tomorrow? Some alien dreadnought hovered over your window at 3 a.m., shot that little beam of light inside, and plucked you out. Would people miss what you did? Would people miss what you said? Would people miss who it was that you were? Would people miss who it was that you made them believe that they were? Because I think part of that underlying ethos of I don't want to be happy, I want to be effective, is an ethos of providing. Saying, hey, I want to help other people do things. But there is some bit of happiness that can be spread to people through your being happy. Some bit of alleviation from the daily toils that you can impart on someone else simply by being a light in their life, as opposed to only providing something, as opposed to only being a caregiver. You could be a caretaker and help people be happy. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.